and it looks
All
like,
right.
oh, we're live. We are live. That's it. It worked. I love it when it works.
I love it. You like act all surprised even though you're the one who clicked live.
It's the last time I did one of these, it worked for YouTube, but it didn't work for LinkedIn. So
So
I'm
we're on
very
both.
excited that it's working for both. So, and as a
Excellent.
matter of fact, if you're watching us on LinkedIn, just put a little note in the thing, say yes, we can see you.
Awesome.
All right, so here we are. This is part 2 of the Decolonizing Our Voices conversation, and I am here today once again with my very dear friend and colleague, Sa-Eun. Sa-Eun, would you like to introduce yourself briefly again?
Yeah. And I will keep this one short because I went really long in the first one.
That's okay.
So, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again. My name is Sa-Eun, and I am a cross-cultural coach. I've been focusing my work on decolonizing our voice and our relationship with money. And I'm very, very passionate about these two topics because my former work is in international development and microfinance. I will quickly just mention again that I am standing right now in South Korea after having left, I guess that's the word I can use now, having left my motherland, South Korea, at age 2. I've recently returned, wanting to reconnect with my roots and all the juicy wisdom of my ancestors and the land.
And thank you for mentioning that too, because before we started recording, part of the conversation that we had was that I thought that it was really interesting because you are standing now in a land to which you're indigenous, and I am not. I'm coming, as many of you may know, I'm coming to you from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and I am. Clearly, I am of white European descent, so my ancestry is settlers, and not indigenous. So I think there's a difference in perspective that that will emerge. That's going to
Yeah.
be interesting too. Yeah. So real fast, why don't we talk a little bit about like what? And you're the expert, so I'm going to pass this to you. What do we mean when we're talking with decolonizing our voices? Like, what is that?
Right. And can I just step back just one moment?
Oh
Because
yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
curious if anybody is joining us live right now.
Oh.
And if you are, I'd love to hear where you are standing in this moment.
Yeah.
If you could just type that in the chat.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a lag. So when they are able to, we'll see it if anyone's able to do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So while maybe some people are typing that in, I can jump to, what are we really talking about, right? Because in our last call, we really went into talking about our personal stories and what decolonization really meant for us individually. And I think that's so beautiful because it shows how diverse the perspective of what decolonization can mean for each and every individual. And it needs to stay that way. But for today, I just want to kind of simplify what we're talking about. And that is, we're talking about reclaiming our power, reclaiming our sovereignty. And I know that Todd's favorite word is agency as well, reclaiming our agency.
That is true. Yeah, reclaiming sovereignty. And I think that what I love about reclaiming sovereignty, and hello, Tanya, by the way. Tanya's joining us from a suburb of Chicago.
Yay, Chicago.
And what I love about sovereignty is like the word that pops up for me is national. Like there's something community based when I think of sovereignty. But when I think of voice, a voice is something that's very personal and very individual. And there's like not like there's a both and, not an either or. in this space, which I think is really, you know, delightful, but also a little scary. Right? Like sovereignty is also associated, like when I think of national sovereignty from the perspective of, you know, the like colonizers, right? It's like that word had been co-opted and had been used in a whole bunch of different ways. So reclaiming sovereignty is a very, very powerful kind of thing from that
You know,
perspective.
when you say that, when you point that out, I also feel it too. Like I feel this like nervousness in my body, and it connects to why I want to keep using the word sovereignty.
Right.
It's because also, like you said, you know, you connect it to community, right? A nation,
Mm-hmm.
and there's the land to which
Mm-hmm.
the community belongs to. So from
Mm-hmm.
an individual perspective, it's like our body is the land
Mm-hmm.
on which we live, our soul
Mm-hmm.
habitate. And so reclaiming our sovereignty is reclaiming this land as my own,
Yep.
and having the power to choose who we are and what we want.
Mm. The power to choose who we are and what we want. And oh, there's so much stuff in there. And soon, the other thing that I'd also like to do is just sort of backtrack a little bit, because right before we started filming, you challenged me on something, and I love it when you challenge me on stuff. And this is too good, right? You know, and you said, "Hey Todd, you know, what do you mean you're not indigenous
Mm,
to the space where you're in?" And or no, it was what do you I described myself as a colonizer,
yes.
and you said, what do you mean, you know, you're a colonizer, like what colonizing are you doing? And the thing that popped up for me was identity, and how we choose to fill our identity. And I think that this might be an interesting segue as we move into, you know, how do we use this concept within the concept of leadership, and not just, you know, corporate leadership, but also like how do we lead ourselves in this space where this becomes important. And identity is like, when I combine that with agency, it's like identity is something that I can choose. I can choose what goes into my identity to a certain extent, and I can choose what doesn't. Like there's some things that I can't. I am a cisgendered white man. I live in Canada. You know, there's no version of that that makes me indigenous to Canada. Um, However, you know, colonizer, and I might get into trouble by saying this, but you know, well, let's be bold and see what happens. Colonizer might not be, you know, might not be the right word, right? Maybe it's settler, maybe it's something else. But at the same time, like it has to be something.
I love this. So you see, as you're speaking, I'm like, what if, can I offer you? Because like I shared with you, you're not the first person I'm having this conversation with. So many cisgendered white male, especially sitting in power position, you
Mm-hmm.
know, are like, when we begin this conversation, first thing they say is, yep, I know, I'm aware that I'm a beneficiary of this
Mm-hmm.
colonized world narrative.
Yes.
And I feel responsible and I feel guilty.
Yep.
So what I'm
That
hearing
tracks.
is,
I feel it. Yep. That tracks.
yeah. So what does that feel like to be in that narrative as that character of the colonizer?
Character. I think it's a really interesting question. And I think one of the things that I love about that question is that it's only recently that I've even been able to think in those terms, right? I was born in the 70s. I was born in Canada. I've been here my whole life. I went to school in Canada. I learned Canadian history, and specifically, I learned Canadian history in English Canada. So it was like the hierarchy was British and then French and then Indigenous, and like in that order. And there has been so much unlearning that
Mm,
has needed to happen in order for me to exist within this context. So even the word decolonization is kind of scary,
mhm,
because it's only recently that colonization has become like I've it's only recently that I've fully understood the violence
mhm,
associated with the word colonization. And I think that's what's important. Like, and that's the important unlearning. And there's lots of Canadian contexts that have helped me get there, right? There, there's the missing and murdered Indigenous women's probe. There's the recent uh, uh, residential school crisis here in
mhm,
Canada. And this particular Canadian government has done more to highlight some of these topics than previous Canadian governments have, and that's fantastic. And there's so much more still to do. Um, yeah, I don't know
yeah,
that I'm answering your
it
question. What
feels
it
really
feels like,
overwhelming,
yeah,
right?
it's big. It's a
It
big
feels
topic.
so because yeah, it's a topic that covers not only so much, I mean, pretty much the whole world,
Mhm.
the earth as we know it, and the humanity that habitated, but also back generations,
Yes.
right? Like all the trauma that's been passed down. It's
Mhm.
about 500 years of colonization history.
Mhm.
And and for one individual to exist today, you have to have had all these ancestors
Mhm.
who've lived and passed passed
Mhm.
you forward, right? And that's out of 500 years. Do you know how many ancestors you've had to have in order for you to be here today?
Very, very many. Yes.
It's
Very many.
somebody did
If
the
I go back that far, then I'm actually back in Europe. If I go back far enough,
right.
right?
And that's somebody did the math, and it's 90,000 people just
Oh my,
for one. And
wow!
we're only talking about the blip history, 500 years
Right,
of colonization. I mean, we can go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years. Now we're talking a lot, but yeah, just for this one word we're talking about today, colonization,
right,
decolonization, how much that applies. It's 90,000 people for Sa-Eun Park to be standing in South Korea today and
right.
be using my voice to have this discussion.
Eh,
So of course it feels overwhelming. How can we? How can we heal all this that's happened through just
right.
for we're not even talking about 8 billion people in the world, just one person.
Yeah. That it's you're right. That's overwhelming, but somehow it also makes me feel a little better.
Oh, good. What is it that makes you feel better?
you know that, and I think I mentioned this. I can't remember if I mentioned this already or if I mentioned this before we started filming. But unlearning, right? Like there's this
Mhm,
process of unlearning what was learned, and you know approaching with a critical eye that which I've already known, and applying it. And I think that's the important part, because and I shared this before we started filming, right? When I was a teenager and I saw the Canadian flag, it meant something very specific, and patriotism meant something very specific and easy to understand and digestible. And
mm.
now it means something different. And you're right,
Could you
there's guilt and
share
there's strangeness. Pardon me.
what is that difference?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because in the past, if I go back in time and I think of Canada Day and the Canada Day celebrations and the things which were very, very European and British based, um,
Mm,
it it was that there was a pride, but it was closed. Like it was for me, and
mm,
and not, obviously not just for me, but like it was for me and for people who were taught the same way that I was taught. And we didn't necessarily all look the same, but at the same time, you know, there was sort of a homogeneousness about it that was about sort of being a settler, and
Mm,
everything else was outside. And I think that what the unlearning is doing is it's cracking that open in a way that's beautiful, and allows for a richness that wasn't there before. And some of it is guilt, that, like, for whatever part that I played in not allowing that richness in the past, but part of it's also some grief around what
mhm,
I missed out on,
mm,
because that richness has always been there. Like, it has been there long before me,
mm,
long before my ancestors knew what Canada was, long before Canada was called Canada,
mm.
right?
Wow.
Like, there's a richness on this land that I've only just started to scratch the surface of. And
Wow.
it's lovely and beautiful and sad. And all of
Mm,
those things all at the same time. So of course it's overwhelming. Um,
mhm,
and just to and I believe that this messiness that I'm finding myself in, um, is an essential skill,
yeah.
not
Yeah.
just to leaders. I mean, I think we're all leaders, but not just to leaders, but just like, this is how to human.
Yes.
Yeah, this just feels like how to human.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for your
Mm.
vulnerability and sharing your process. It's
Well,
so
thank you for asking the questions. You're good at this.
I'm a coach.
Uh-huh.
We
I can
learn how to
tell.
do
I can tell.
and we have the same training.
Yep.
Um, I just gosh, as I'm hearing your story, it went from this like this box
Mhm.
to really like you use the word crack, like it went just this expansive perspective, the richness,
Mhm.
as you say it, I can see this ability to just, I mean, you just, there's such an expansion of your perspective.
Mm.
And then you brought it back to human.
Mm.
It's like an expansion and then a centering, both.
Mhm.
And you're saying that to continue to do this process of expansion and centering, that there is messiness and gooiness and some grief and overwhelm and lots of emotion
Mhm.
that's not easy to be with. And so that is some of the common blocks
Mhm.
that we see towards this topic of
Mhm.
decolonization.
Mm. It makes it sound like, and if I'm interpreting you correctly, I think it, again, I'm feeling a little better as you sort of walk me through this. Because I think, like, I think that I was holding on to some shame or grief or guilt about the messiness. Like, that this was hard to figure out, right?
Ah,
If I was just a better person, I would get this. I would understand it. And and it's when that shows up that it makes it easy to kind of go, oh, you know what? I'm going to, nope, I'm not going to engage with this. That's
mhm,
for someone else.
mhm.
And I think what you're inviting me to is, it's okay to be in that messy space, because on some level there's a lot of us that are in that messy space, and it's just like, that's the necessary first step. And
Yeah, yeah,
huh,
yeah. Oh my gosh, you just said it. Yeah, that's it.
it's so interesting, because when I first imagined this conversation, I'm going to say this to anyone who's listening too, I wrote the text for this conversation and it was very cut and dry. And it was like, we're going to talk about what's next and what the next steps are and what to do and blah, blah, blah. And you were like, okay, wait. It's not nearly that simple. And I wasn't entirely sure what you meant until now. This is a first for coaching conversations, by the way. Usually I am not coached in these moments, but I really love that I'm being coached.
I'm like, is this a coaching moment? I mean, you know, that word coaching is so interesting because usually it's just a conversation between humans with curiosity. And how powerful is it that because of the perspective that I bring with my life experience and the land I stand on and this ancestry and the perspective that you bring and you know the land that you stand on and your ancestry and the history that lives in your body through your DNA. When the two of us come together and come with love and compassion and curiosity, and we decide on a topic, right? That scared us both. We're both like, ooh, this is scary. Let's go with it, right?
Yep, that's true. This is scary. Let's do it.
That something opens up. Like when you say coaching moment, what I'm hearing is something is opening up.
Yes. Well, and isn't that it? Because that's the joy of those coaching moments, right? Those sort of those blips of like, oh, I'm on the edge of revelation. I don't know what's going to be revealed necessarily, but I'm there on the edge. And there's something more that's possible now as a result. And I think what that says to me is, okay, don't stop. Like, okay, this is what one first baby step into this messy space looks like. What's the next one? And what's the next one? We don't need to know the answer to that question. All we need is the courage and the support to want to take those next steps. And yeah, you had earlier, you talked to me about, sort of war and peace and these themes popping up for you, right? Yes. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about it.
Well, because we were talking about so what, right? We're still like, okay, fine, decolonization. Like, okay, we get the history and maybe some of us recognize how it impacts our lives today in the present moment in our homes and our companies and workspaces and our community.
Exactly.
But so what,
Yep.
Like what do we get after we go through this messy process that none of us really want to go through? And to me, what came up is war and peace. And we know what wars are ongoing in this moment. That connects to all of our lives. And we also know what wars we are living with in our workplaces and in our homes and in our hearts.
Yeah. Yes.
And so what is to go from there to peace? Because peace starts from here. Like you said earlier, voice is such a personal thing. It's so individual. Like my voice says, this voice, you won't hear it from any other body.
Exactly.
You record this now, and even millions of years later, like you won't get to have this one voice that you hear. Only Sa-Eun Park sounds like this. Only Todd sounds like that.
Oh, Tanya, can we bring this in? Tanya,
Yeah.
thank you for this. Let's engage with this. So Tanya says that she can trace her family history for more than 500 years in the same country. And now that I'm exploring the world, I find that the key is to treat indigenous cultures with respect and curiosity. However, I can also see how an explorer can become self-absorbed in a new place. And I think
Mhm.
that's true. It is very, very true. Right. And again,
Yeah.
I think the concept of explorer is really interesting too, because I don't think that's not just the explorers, from the history books. Like that's exploration in general, right? And
Yeah.
I have not done very much exploring, but I know that you have, right? You talked about the history and all of the places that you have been and that you have
Mm.
lived, like not just visited, but that you've lived in so many different places.
The thing is, because of my exploration of different places, I want to offer a different perspective of the word indigenous.
I love
Because,
that.
like Tanya, I also can trace back my family history for more than, ooh, that's amazing for you to be able to trace back more than 500 years. And in the same country, right? So there's like this, for someone like Tanya and myself, there's this like homogeneity, clarity of our ancestry, but also there are millions, yeah, millions, I think I'll stay with that, of people who can't, because we're so mixed.
I can't. That's me. I can't.
And so how do we apply the word indigenous there? Like,
Mhm.
who is your ancestry? Or those people who don't know who their parents are, like adopted.
Mhm.
Where do I belong? What is indigeneity for me?
Mm. I,
And so, yeah, I'm
it's just
curious.
you touched on so much because again, that's a question that I don't think I can answer. As I was thinking about this conversation, and even and this isn't something that I've shared on this program or possibly with you either, but you brought up adopted. Well, I'm also adopted, so I actually don't know. Like if someone said to me, like what is the land to which you are actually indigenous? Like I don't know what motherland I would return to if I wanted to return to a motherland.
Hmm.
All I've ever known is this, which feels like home, which I guess means it is. But I like that it's cracked open,
Hmm.
messy, and something's spilling out,
Ah,
and something's being invited in as a result.
wow.
Yeah, it's more. It's more than I ever thought it was.
I feel like the definition of home connects to indigeneity, indigenousness.
Hmm.
Where is that connection for you?
It's very personal.
Mm.
It's not about the land. It's about my family. It's about the people I love.
Mm-hmm.
Right when I'm with my community, I'm home. And if my
Yeah.
community was uprooted and put somewhere else, then I'd be home there.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That feels like peace. That feels like peace. Oh my goodness. So I can't believe that it's almost been 30 minutes.
I know.
I think we have to
We
wrap
actually
up.
didn't go into what we want to talk about today,
We
which is not.
didn't. I know, right? Are we doing a part three? Maybe we're doing a part three. But
Um, Did you
maybe,
say
oh, Tanya, I love that. Maybe let's do this. Maybe you are indigenous to planet Earth. We live in a global world. It may be time to change our thinking. I love that.
yes?
I thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank
It's
you. Thank you. That's it.
yeah, and and what it is like maybe some of the language that we're using when we think of decolonization isn't as helpful as we think it is.
That's another amazing
That's a
topic. Yeah,
whole topic, isn't
I
it?
agree
Yeah,
with you.
I shouldn't introduce that. We've got 30
No, no,
seconds to go.
no, please. Well, I know we need to wrap up, but Tanya, like that's it, you know.
Mhm.
And so maybe we're moving out of this nationalistic definition of land.
Mm.
And I think that we're moving towards uniting around our Mother Earth,
Mm.
humans. That's what you
Oh,
offered us, Tanya.
and what I love about that is that, you know, we are more connected to, like, we are more a part of Earth and a part of nature than we are apart from it,
Yes.
right? And whether it's
We
here or
are
whether it's there.
nature.
Exactly. Exactly. And maybe that's the thing. It's there's you know, yeah. There's so many things. There's so many things that are popping up as I think about that. But
I know.
I
Yeah.
we do need to
Maybe
wrap.
part 2 is coming.
Yeah, we do need to wrap. Tell you what, you know what? So I love so much of what you brought up, and I love the way that you do this. So if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
On LinkedIn, there is a link to schedule calls with me.
Awesome.
And you can also email me to the human kintsugi
Hmm.
gmail.com. Kintsugi is a Japanese art.
That's the art of repairing with gold, isn't it?
That's right. From the cracked pottery.
Yeah, from the crack
Yeah.
pottery. So the human kintsugi at gmail.com.
Yes.
Fantastic. And as you all know, I am. You can reach me on LinkedIn or at toddcargis.com. And that's a wrap for now. But Sa-Eun, thank you so much for being with me today. And Tanya, thank you very much for your fantastic contributions as well. I so appreciate you. I so appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Todd.
All
Really
right, so I'm going to sign off. Thanks, everyone.